Well, first, I'd like to thank you all for being here. Obviously, the media is our voice to the community. And so I simply want to start off by saying I think yesterday's verdict I cannot be more clear that this is a time for real change, real meaningful change. I think we should no longer have to stand by with our fingers crossed, hoping that we get the outcome for justice that we all like to see. We should all feel confident that when we see something in front of us that clearly indicates somebody has violated the law, somebody has taken someone's life, that somebody has abused their authority, that we should be confident that the right decision is going to be made. And in this case, I think the right decision clearly was made, but I also say that there's more work to be done, that this is just the beginning, that we have to deal with accountability, we have to deal with justice, and that we have to reform law enforcement. It's long overdue. We'll do our part in Oakland to start that conversation about what does police reform look like in our community. And so one of the things that I'll be moving forward with is holding community conversations, really restorative circles, right? How do we talk about changing a system that hasn't worked for everyone, but acknowledging that there is an opportunity here with a chief that is willing to hear the voices of our community and make decisions to help improve and strengthen trust. And so with that, I'm open to questions.
Again, please raise your hand and I will call on you. Last name I George?
Yes, hello, George Kelly, Bay Area News Group. Is there a part in this community conversation that you're planning that deals with continuing community trauma around the spike in homicides and violent crimes? Or is that community conversation focused mostly on restorative justice and or police reform?
I think you don't come into a conversation like that limiting what community feels. I think it's important that we be open to have all conversations around trauma in our community, trauma at the hands of police, trauma that people are experiencing by the high level of violence that we're experiencing in the community. I think we're ripe to have all of those conversations because they're not mutually exclusive, right? That if people are dealing with trauma because of the violence, that could impact a police interaction. And it could have an impact on how people view police as not being responsive to the needs of the community when we talk about violence. And so I do think that they're both meaningful. And so we're open to have both conversations.
Next question, Kenny Choi, please, sir. Kenny.
Chief Armstrong, is reform possible when you have police unions that have historically adamantly opposed change? We've been talking about reform for quite a long time. What kinds of reforms have been made so far? And also, does that include certain bills that are being passed? We know that San Francisco's district attorney has introduced a bill recently that would make it easier for the prosecutor's office to obtain an arrest warrant for an officer. Can you address some of those questions?
Yeah, I think that change is already began at the Oakland Police Department. I think if you look at the data that we've been collecting for the last 4 years, particularly around stop data, recognizing the need to reduce the negative impact policing was having on the African-American community in particular, you'll see that our stop data shows a 63% reduction in the stops of African-Americans. That is the entry point of contact with police, right? If you can touch less people, there's less opportunity to have force encounters. There's less opportunity for misconduct to occur, or it's less opportunity to have negative interactions that reduce trust. And so I think that's the beginning. I think when we talk about the openness to programs like Macro, that could be responsive to those suffering from mental illness, right? The idea that maybe there is not a need for a badge and a gun for every type of call, acknowledging that maybe police are not the best response. Can we divert those calls to other mental health professionals to be able to respond and provide the support and services needed? When we look at all of the efforts we've taken on around reimagining policing and just looking at the opportunity to maybe police our communities in a different way. But also within the city of Oakland, our race and equity department, right, led by Director Darlene Flynn, having conversations within your organization about how race and equity plays a role in decision-making, everyday decision-making, how we go out and provide police services in our community. I think acknowledging that our willingness at the highest levels in law enforcement, holding people accountable, holding officers accountable, being very clear about what we are going to practice within our department, which is de-escalation tactics, investing in additional training, being proactive about creating policies that limit interactions or use of force tactics that could lead to potential serious injury or death. We've done that, banning the carotid chokehold, banning, positional asphyxia, looking at ways in which we can ensure that we don't create a situation that leads to a tragic outcome.
Chief, I appreciate that response. And just really quickly regarding AB 1.
All right, we're going to go to the next person, Christian Captain, please, sir. Christian.
Can you hear me? Just to build on what Kenny was just asking a moment ago, specifically, I was wondering if I can get your input on federal legislation, because there is some federal legislation that's making its way through the Justice and Policing Act, and wanted to get your take on that, specifically if you have any concerns about qualified immunity, any kind of chilling effect that could have on policing or on further recruitment somewhere down the road.
Well, when I look at these things, I think a lot of them are similar to things that we are already implementing within the Oakland Police Department. When we talk about being under a negotiated settlement agreement for 18 years, it really has pushed us to come up with progressive policies that sort of are directly in line with the things that are in some of the Justice and Policing Act legislation, right? Talking about law enforcement accountability, the department has a strong accountability process that includes not only an internal administrative investigation component, but it includes our police commission. We have the strongest police commission in America, holding our department accountable, but they also have their own investigative body, right? The CPRB that investigates cases independently, and their decisions weigh as much as the chief of police. And so I think that is progress. I also think that we are a part of the transparency and data collection process. We have what we call slalom dashboards that essentially provide all of our data points on these at-risk areas, whether we're talking about stop data or we're talking about use of force. All of those things are being now uploaded to our website so that the public can view that information. But when you talk about, limiting qualified immunity, I think it's important a discussion to what does that limited qualified immunity look like. Wanting to make sure that we can hold officers accountable, but also not put officers in a position where they don't feel like this is a responsibility that they want to take on. Obviously, they make tremendous sacrifices. They understand the danger that comes along with this job, but also they understand the accountability that comes along with it. And so just think that there needs to be a balance to make sure for those that take on this very difficult job, that they have the support that they need, but also that they know that they are going to be held accountable, particularly when we talk about the loss of life.
All right, next question, Deborah, please, Deborah.
Hi, I missed a little of the beginning, so I don't know if this question was already asked, but I was wondering what kinds of de-escalation techniques is the police force being trained in?
So the Oakland Police Department has one of the most robust de-escalation program in the state of California. We have a virtual system, that is a virtual system that actually takes officers through scenario-based training. Essentially, what we're doing is putting officers in positions where they have to make decisions under stress. What some would call shoot, no shoot decisions. Officers are challenged to maneuver, to be able to pick the right use of force item that they should use and be able to justify that force. But also emphasizing the importance of communication, right? How do we talk to people? Trying to a proper assessment, trying to identify what is the proper response. And when that response has achieved compliance, to immediately be able to de-escalate that situation and reduce force, right? Dial things back, communicate with people about what it is that you're asking them to do. And when people are injured or hurt, ensuring that they are receiving the proper medical care that they need immediately. And then it comes down to accountability. How are we evaluating that force? And one of the things that I can say at the Oakland Police Department is that we investigate all use of force. And that use of force is investigated to determine, was it in policy, but also was it compliant with the law? And I think that's how you practice constitutional policing, ensuring that the reason in which officers use force is consistent with the law and policy. And we have some of the most progressive policies in the country, and that those policies were created in partnership with our police commission and community. And so acknowledging that not only did we improve policy, but we did it in partnership. And so that's important.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to move over to Cron 4. Cron 4. All right, and we go back up to Rasta. Rasta, are you there?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Chief, this is with NBC Bay Area News. My name is Anusha Rasta. I wanted to ask you about the DOJ launching a pattern and practice investigation on the Minneapolis Police Department. If I'm not mistaken, the same thing happened to the Oakland Police Department maybe a couple of years ago. I wanted to ask you how effective you think this is in sort of reforming the police departments and improving them.
Well, I think you always want to examine past decisions that officers have made that might be similar in nature to better understand, is there a policy or training that is leading to the poor decision making? Is there something within the culture of the organization that can be identified through an investigation that can help intervene in these type of use of force incidents? And so I think it's important. I think for our department in the past, we've learned from these type of reviews. We've improved policy as a result of these type of reviews. We went back and changed tactics and training as a result of these reviews. So I do think that there's a lot to learn. There's also the opportunity to learn if there's something that you're doing right. And if some area that you should provide more training on. And so I do think that there's a lot to learn from these type of reviews. And so I think as a department that's under federal oversight, we oftentimes learn things from the review of our independent monitor.
All right, coming back to Cron 4. Cron 4.
Yes, Sanaa Suharnia for Crom 4. Chief Armstrong, given the disproportionate number of fatal officer-involved shootings involving people of color, even if the use of force policies are changed to eliminate certain types of force, what steps do you think are necessary to eliminate the racial element, especially when systemic racism is so deeply rooted in our country?
I think it's important that people learn from what we're doing here in the city of Oakland and really recognize the entry point to any police contact is the initial stop. And if you can limit bias-based stops or stops that actually are not fruitful, they actually are not connected to a crime or some criminal offense that you're investigating, I think there's a real opportunity that's being missed. And so what we've done at the Oakland Police Department is practice what we call intelligence-led policing, really encouraging officers to make sure when they make stops, despite race, that is actually connected to some type of criminal investigation or some follow-up related to crime, right? Some nexus to crime. That these ideas of random stops, these ideas of what we would call in policing fishing expeditions, they need to end. They are rooted in bias. They oftentimes stop people who are uninvolved in crime, and they're just not effective. The data has shown that they're much less effective than stops that are what we call intelligence-led, stops that you have information in advance that help you better understand why you need to stop this individual. I think that's important. It also says to community that there are checks and balances in place to make sure that law enforcement is not abusing their authority. And so, we encourage people to learn from the Oakland Police Department. We've shared our way in which we do intelligence-led policing with other departments. But I think if you look at our numbers, you'll see the dramatic decrease in overall stops that we've had in the last 4 years. And I think that shows that we're reducing footprint, which means that less people are actually being touched by law enforcement. And we know that those numbers vastly include our minority community, both African American and Latino.
Okay, Chief, we have one last question. It's from Darwin. Darwin, are you able to come through? I know you sent me a message here.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Chief Armstrong, thanks for being available today. The conversation in Oakland for a number of years, there are some people in the city who want it to move beyond just questions of reform or changing police tactics or changing police training. And there's a conversation about defunding the police. The city council did pass this resolution saying they want to aspire to dramatically reduce the police budget, its portion of the general fund in the next budget. That would obviously involve shrinking police services. What do you say to people who sort of take that position that we need to move beyond reform and actually just shrink the role of police in society?
Well, I think all of us would like to live in communities where there wasn't a need for police because we weren't affected by violence, that we were not affected by crime. And I think that unfortunately is not our reality in Oakland in its current state. I think when you have 45 homicides and you have 100% increase in shootings, it says that there's a need for law enforcement to be able to intervene and remove people who want to continue to victimize our community. So I think that the numbers clearly suggest that we have a problem with violence, and I think it's clearly unacceptable. But when I hear the term defunding, I often think, do we leave marginalized communities vulnerable? And so we acknowledge that police have been overused in multiple areas where maybe we're not needed or the most effective. I think that is a better conversation for me is about what are alternative responses to certain crimes. Like I talked about, when we're talking about mental illness, we're talking about the unsheltered population. We might even be talking about low-level disagreements between people. How do we begin to have crisis intervention trained people to come in and deal with those type of crimes? But I think the reality is that there are so many systems that need to be fixed. When people say defunding one system that has not worked for people of color does not fix the problem. You have to examine all of these systems, and they can't be fixed in a day. And so, as someone that grew up in this community, that's went to schools that were underperforming and not giving me, I believe, the highest quality education, it says that there's a need across the board to reinvest in several different systems, whether we're talking about education or housing. We're talking about economics. I mean, I think there's so many more systems that impact crime overall that we have to invest in as well. And so I think policing is just one system that I think has not been as effective as it could. But I will say to you that there is an opportunity at this point for us to have discussions about how do we police differently? How do we limit our responsibility in a way that helps community have less interactions with law enforcement?
Okay, Chief, do you have any closing remarks before we close this out, sir?
No, again, I just thank everybody for being here. I hope the media understands the importance of this moment. But this moment cannot just be about the verdict from yesterday. It's about how we can take the verdict from yesterday and move forward together law enforcement and community continuing to change this system and reforming this system so that it works for everybody. And you have my commitment as the chief of the Oakland Police Department to be at the table with community, coming up with solutions to make life better, make life safer for all people in the city of Oakland. And I hope we can be an example to all police departments across the country. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Have a great day.